ladies and gentlemen. I'm blind, but I'm able to read thanks to a wonderful new system known as Broil. I'm sorry, I'll just feel that again.
Funny, that song wasn't supposed to play. I was trying to play the orange one. I like that deep one. Yeah, it was supposed to be that orange squeeze, turning orangey orange into vitamin C's. But I clicked next and that one came on, so. Oh, now I get it. Whatever. It wasn't meant to be. It was supposed to be the blind instrumental when it shows Rothschild there. Or Prince Edward, or whichever one. They're all Rothschilds in one way or another. I'm on a half an hour earlier than I'd say because I figured I'd eat half of it and then half of it after this one because it's going to get really hot today and it's only 1:30, so I want to get all this done because I can't run the air conditioner while it makes my voice robot-y. So the fact that it's going to get really hot and it gets the hottest at 4 o'clock, between 2 and 4, because the wind just stops for some reason a lot of times between 2 and 4, and then all the heat just starts coming out of that dead lake. Not the dead lake, the ground, because the dead lake is actually like super cold. So that cold, the heat is going to it, and it's causing a lot of humidity. And then it's just humidity from all the pollution in the lake. You can't always get what you want. Anyway. I'm not gonna sing the second part. It doesn't really seem to apply. Well, I mean, get what you need, but it's just knowledge and spirit. It's more than everything else, but your physical body doesn't like to agree. Your spirit may agree, but your physical body's like, hey, I don't like this. So I'm gonna try to get these next two parts out as fast as I can, so I can stay as comfortable as I can. So this is page 120 of Mein Kampf. This is a critique of Mein Kampf. Hitler is a benevolent psychopath, the same as Luke, I am your father. That's literally the benevolent psychopath speaking. And he's not the only one. They pop their heads up over and over. Stalin was one of them. All American presidents are benevolent psychopaths. So let's continue. Mr. Hittite, my nickname for him. Mr. Hittite says, any policy which aims at securing the existence of a nation by restricting the birth rate robs that nation of its future. He's correct. But he's about to do something worse. You see how they just, oh, he's the lesser of two evils, or, you know what I mean? There's no such thing as a lesser of two evils. Oh, this is less destructive than this one, but they both don't believe in God. And they both believe in evolution. It's like, then I don't want either. I shouldn't have to vote for either. What does political cartoons say the third party always is? Some communist spy of Moscow. It's like, then who are the two candidates? Anyway. They can't all three be spies of Moscow. Oh, can they? Anyway. So the second thing here, because remember this is two-part thing. did. Where the first example was the French example, artificially restricting number of births, thus avoiding an excessive population. And this is the second one he gives. A second solution is that of internal colonization, compartmentalization. This is a proposal which is frequently made in our own time, and one hears it lauded a good deal. It is a suggestion that is well meant, but it is misunderstood by most people, so that it is the source of more mischief than can be imagined. It is certainly true that the productivity of the soil can be increased within certain limits, but only within defined limits and not indefinitely. Remember that. By increasing surplus birth rate in Germany for a certain period of time without running any danger of hunger. Wait, what? By increasing the productive powers of the soil, it will be possible to balance the effect of a surplus birth rate in Germany for a certain period of time without running any danger of hunger. But we have to face the fact that the general standard of living is rising more quickly than even the birth rate. You see how immigration actually does solve this? Because what do you have to do to immigrate? You have to travel. What do you have to be in order to travel and survive? You have to be strong. So literally, he continues, the requirements of food and clothing are becoming greater from year to year and are out of proportion to those of our ancestors of, let's say, 100 years ago. He's not wrong there. So also the best people who immigrate are ones who came from farms. They know how to grow their own food, so they're able to establish their own food. You see how living exactly how Scripture tells you solves all these problems? But he doesn't want to give glory to that, does he? He wants to demonize it and eventually tell you, oh, it's just made up by the Jays. So he continues, it would therefore be a mistaken view that every increase in the productive powers of the soil will supply the requisite conditions for an increase in the population. No, that is true up to a certain point only. For at least a portion of the increased produce of the soil will be consumed by the margin of increased demands caused by the steady rise in the standard of living. You might see this pretty good come December when Trump is in office. And it has to do with Russia. But anyway, he continues, but even if these demands were to be curtailed to the narrowest limits possible, and if at the same time we were to use all our available energies in the intense cultivation, we should here reach a definite limit which is conditioned by the inherent nature of the soil itself. No matter how industriously we may labor, we cannot increase agricultural production beyond this limit. Therefore, though we may postpone the evil hour of distress for a certain time, it will arrive at last. The first phenomenon will be the recurrence of famine periods from time to time after bad harvests, etc. The intervals between these famines will become shorter and shorter, and the more the population increases, and finally the famine times will disappear only in those rare years of plenty when the granaries are full, and a time will ultimately come when even those years of plenty there will not be enough to go around, so that hunger will dog the footsteps of the nation. Nature must now step in once more and select those who increase, or who are to survive, or else man will help himself by artificially preventing his own increase, with all the fatal consequences for the race and the species which have been already mentioned. It may be objective here that in one form or another, this future is in store for all mankind, and that the individual nation or race cannot escape the general fate. So, this is why they don't want you reading this book, because this man puts forward historical and political facts, but then, just like most politicians, inserts all of his lies because he's trying to literally become a god or king of the world. So when you see in this nation that grain silos are being destroyed, whether it's an act, a divine act, or a purposeful act of man, does not matter at this point. When during the whole lockdowns, instead of just giving food to starving people, they destroy it in front of your eyes. Because they've created a false system that doesn't morally make sense. How can you make so much money off the medical industry of dying people? Yet, you'll ruin the economy if you give away free food because you would have destroyed it anyway. So now this is page 121, the 12-minute mark. It's going to get hotter and hotter as it gets to the 50-minute mark and the hour mark. It's going to get hot in here. He continues, at first glance, that objection seems logical enough, but we have to take the following into account. The day will certainly come when the whole of mankind will be forced to check the augmentation of the human species. But there will be no further possibility of adjusting the productivity of the soil to the perpetual increase in population. Nature must then be allowed to use her own methods, or man may possibly take the task of regulation into his own hands and establish the necessary equilibrium by the application of better means that we have at our disposal today. But then it will be a problem for mankind as a whole. There's a word for that. I think they call it a pan. Finish it for me. He continues, whereas now only those races, he says, have to suffer from want which no longer have the strength and daring to acquire sufficient soil to fill their needs. For, as things stand today, vast spaces still lie uncultivated all over the surface of the globe. Those spaces are only waiting for the plowshare. Yeah. You can make deserts into paradises. You just have to work hard. And it is quite certain that nature did not set those territories apart as exclusive pastures of any one nation or race to be held unutilized and reserved for the future. Such land awaits the people who have the strength to acquire it and the diligence to cultivate it. Yeah, that's why it's good that he's talking about this now, because it's the Machiavellian Paradise Lost is what I named this. Machiavelli, all kinds of historical writers can say the same things he's saying. It doesn't make his final solution right. You understand? He continues, nature knows no political frontiers. She begins by establishing life on this globe. So a her? Is Hitler saying that God is a woman? I think Hitler just said God's a woman. Whoa. Anyway, that explains a lot, doesn't it? So how flamboyant he was. Anyway, so let me read that again. Nature knows no political frontiers. She begins by establishing life on this globe. He's worshiping the Queen of Heaven. And then watches the free play of forces. That's Gnosticism. Those who show the greatest courage and industry are the children nearest to her heart, and they will be granted the sovereign right of existence. This is Queen of Heaven worship. You can't make this up. He's an Egyptian pharaoh. That's why he's called the Führer, because that's Pharaoh. He continues, if a nation confines itself to internal colonization while other races are perpetually increasing their territorial annexations, Britain, UK, British Crown, all over the globe, that nation will be forced to restrict the numerical growth of its population at a time when the other nations are increasing theirs. This situation must eventually arrive. He's just researched British history, that's all. It will arrive soon if the territory which the nation has at its disposal be small. Now it is unfortunately true that only too often the best nations, or to speak more exactly, the only really cultured nations, who at the same time are the chief bearers of human progress, have decided in their blind pacifism to refrain from the acquisition of new territory and to be content with internal colonization. But at the same time, nations of inferior quality, according to Hitler, succeed in getting hold of large spaces for colonization all over the globe. The state of affairs which must result from this contrast is the following. So, let me see. I was going to say something. So I'm pretty sure America is slightly bigger than China, if not a similar size, but I think America's bigger than China. And it has like 500 million to 700 million people in it, because we don't actually know the real numbers. And China has like, 1.5 billion. So just kind of think about that. China needs to offload some people, and there's more people who speak English in China than people who speak English in America, just by the sheer numbers. Think about that. China needs to expand. They didn't get an mRNA. The only nation that didn't get an mRNA. Everywhere else did. Okie dokie. So he says the state of affairs which must result from this contrast is the following. Races which are culturally superior. See, what does that mean? Then that's not their blood then. But less ruthless would be forced to restrict their increase because of insufficient territory to support the population. While less civilized, in Hitler's opinion, races could increase indefinitely, owing to the vast territories of their disposal. In other words, should the state of affairs continue, then the world will one day be possessed by that portion of mankind which is culturally inferior but more active and energetic. That's called Soviets. They don't have a nation. They're ceaseless wanderers. They're like Satan. They're not given even an atom to stand on and rest their feet. Twisting, turning through the never. All it is, ever, who we are, will be ever, twisting, turning. All it is, now forever, twisting, turning through the never that never comes. These people sing of their torment. He continues at the ends of page 121. A time will come, even though in the distant future, when there can be only two alternatives. Either the world will be ruled according to our modern concept of democracy, and then every decision will be in favor of the numerically stronger races, in his opinion. Remember, I'm quoting this. TOS or whatever this BS is. He continues, or, on page 122 now, or the world will be governed by the law of natural distribution of power, and then those nations will be victorious who are of more brutal will and are not the nations who have practiced self-denial. He's saying the meek shall not inherit the earth, is what he's saying. Oh boy, does he have a wake-up call coming? I love how this story ends, don't you? He continues, nobody can doubt that this world will one day be the scene of dreadful struggles for existence on the part of mankind. Anybody who researches British and Roman and Egyptian history, and then given the context of scripture, yeah, it's not hard to come to these conclusions. He says, in the end, the instinct of self-preservation alone will triumph. This sounds like a Trump campaign. Before its consuming fire, the so-called humanitarianism, which connotes only... Connotes? These are Babylonian words. Only a mixture of fatuous timidity and self-conceit will melt away as under the March sunshine. Oh, we'll see about that. Man has become great through perpetual struggle. In perpetual peace, his greatness must decline. Gee, I remember a certain Owen Benjamin saying that he thinks that perpetual bliss is hell. And that perpetual struggle is actually, that's very strange. Some people think perpetual bliss is hell. Well, then that's why they're not going there. They're not going to perpetual bliss. They don't want perpetual struggle? Well, fine, you get the hellfire. They want it. Well, why would a just God create the hellfire? Because apparently people want to live there. They're already, like, rolling dice and betting on their lot. They write songs saying you're going to party in hell. It's a highway to hell. Sometimes they imagine themselves there. There's like... Okay, I'm not going to get into it. This man's going to realize when the dead are raised exactly who inherits the earth. So he continues, for us Germans, us, the slogan of internal colonization is fatal because it encourages the belief that we have discovered a means which is in accordance with our innate pacifism and which will enable us to work for our livelihood in a half-slumbering existence. Such a teaching, once it were taken seriously by our people, would mean the end of all effort to acquire for ourselves that place in the world which we deserve. Why do you deserve it? You don't have rights. No human, no son of Adam, no daughter of Eve has rights. They have responsibilities. Elohim alone has rights. Elohim alone deserves. He continues, if the average German were once convinced that by this measure he has the chance of ensuing his livelihood and guaranteeing his future, any attempt to take an active and profitable part in sustaining the vital demands of his country would be out of the question. Should the nation agree to such an attitude, then any really useful foreign policy might be looked upon as dead and buried, together with all hope for the future of the German people. Once we know what the consequences of this internal colonization theory would be, we can no longer consider as a mere accident that the fact that among those who inculcate this quite pernicious mentality among our people, the J is always the first in line. He talks about his own government doing it and then saying, oh, but it's all the fault of this guy. Okay. Tell the Democrats. They won't let me do anything. The Democrats are always the first in line. I'm so weak. I can't put an old lady in jail. I can't build a wall. I can't cut your taxes because the Democrats are always first in line. It's pathetic. He continues, he knows his softies only too well not to know that they are ready to be the grateful victims of every swindle which promises them a gold block in the shape of a discovery that will enable them to outwit nature and thus render superfluous the hard and inexorable struggle for existence, so that finally they may become lords of the planet partly by sheer dolus farniente. Now he's using like French words. I thought you were German. You freaking fraud. And partly by working when a pleasing opportunity arises. It cannot be too strongly emphasized that any German internal colonization must first of all be considered as suited only for the relief of social grievances. To carry out a system of internal colonization, the most important preliminary measure would be to free the soil from the grip of the speculator and assure that freedom, but such a system could never suffice to assure the future of the nation without the acquisition of new territory. Remember, it gives the solution to all these things in Scripture, so people don't read it. 27-minute mark here, and I'm already sweating. It's like 92 degrees, apparently. If we adopt a different plan, he says, we shall soon reach a point beyond which the resources of our soil can no longer be exploited, and at the same time we shall reach a point beyond which our manpower cannot develop. Simply having everybody be farmers and grow their own food solves this. Because who doesn't eat? The one who doesn't grow their own food. They go and they travel off to other areas and they, like he says, nature takes care of it, right? So instead of doing this whole race baiting BS, these identity politics, you could just encourage agriculture, give tax incentives, all kinds of stuff, and just turn everybody into a farmer. Then it would work, because they'd be making their own food at their own pace. It's usually exporting of food which depletes soil most of the time, but he won't tell you that because he's funded by Rockefeller and Prescott Bush. So why the hell would he tell you that? He continues, if we adopt a different plan, we shall soon reach the point beyond which the resources of our soil... Oh, I said that. In conclusion, he says, the following must be said. The fact that only up to a limited extent can internal colonization be practiced in a national territory, which is of definitely small area, and the restriction of the procreative faculty, which follows as a result of such conditions, these two factors have a very unfavorable effect on the military and political standing of a nation. This is now page 123. Woo, it's getting hot. The extent of the national territory is a determining factor in the external security of the nation. The larger the territory which a people has at its disposal, the stronger are the national defenses of that people. Military decisions are more quickly, more easily, more completely, and more effectively gained against a people occupying a national territory which is restricted in area than against states which have extensive territories. Moreover, the magnitude of a national territory is in itself a certain assurance that an outside power will not harshly risk the adventure of an invasion, for in that case the struggle would have to be long and exhausting before victory could be hoped for. The risk being so great, there would have to be extraordinary reasons for such an aggressive adventure. Hence it is that the territorial magnitude of a state furnishes a basis whereon national liberty and independence can be maintained with relative ease. while, on the contrary, a state whose territory is small offers a natural temptation to the invader. It's like I'm watching an animal documentary or something. As a matter of fact, he says, so-called national circles in the German Reich rejected those first two possibilities of establishing a balance between the constant numerical increase in the population and a national territory which could not expand proportionately. Oof. But the reasons given for that rejection were different from those which I have just expounded. It was mainly on the basis of certain moral sentiments that restriction of the birth rate was objected to. Proposals for internal colonization were rejected indignantly because it was suspected that such a policy might mean an attack on the big landowners, and that this attack might be the forerunner of a general assault against the principle of private property as a whole. The form in which the latter solution, internal colonization, was recommended justified the misgivings of the big landowners. Funny how he talks about this stuff when he praises the big megacities, saying how beautiful they are, even though their concrete skillet and how they are designed are an abomination to nature. They cause floods. There's a bunch of problems. They cause abnormal heat and cold fluctuations. It's so unnatural. And yet he's going to promote that with all of his buildings, all of his architectural designs. He's a metropolis builder, not a farmer. That's why he speaks to metropolis people, not actual farming people. He uses all these fluffy nonsense words. So he continues, but the form in which the colonization proposal was rejected was not very clever. As regards the impression which such rejection might be calculated to make on the mass of the people, and anyhow it did not go to the root of the problem at all. Only two further ways were left open in which work and breed could be secured for the increasing population. Remember, this is his opinion. 3, it was possible to think of acquiring new territory on which a certain portion of the increasing population could be settled each year, or else. 4, our industry and commerce had to be organized in such a manner as to secure an increase in the exports and thus be able to support our people by the increased purchasing power acquired from the profits made on foreign markets. Notice how none of these are going to be about growing your own food. None of them. So, page 124 now, Mr. Hittite says, therefore, the problem was a policy of territorial expansion or colonial and commercial policy. Both, see how they always just give you two? There's never a third option, huh? Oh, the third one's always a communist spy of Moscow. Both policies were taken into consideration, examined, recommended, and rejected from various standpoints, with the result that the second alternative was finally adopted. The sounder alternative, however, was undoubtedly the first, in his opinion. The principle of acquiring new territory, on which the surplus population could be settled, as many advantages to recommend it, especially if we were to take the future as well as the present into account. Isn't it weird that ancient Israel never had to expand its borders? It was always the borders given by Moses or something smaller than that. You understand? Because they were all farmers. But anyway, it's literally building megacities is how the wicked portion of them even overtook the righteous portion, because they just made sure the righteous portion got smaller and smaller every generation until they either just left or they tried to genocide them. So, where was I at here? I'll just read from here. He says, in the first place, too much importance cannot be placed on the necessity for adopting a policy which will make it possible to maintain a healthy peasant class as the basis of a national community. Many of our present evils have their origin exclusively in the disproportion between the urban and the rural portions of the population. Oh, maybe he'll say something. A solid stock of small and medium farmers has at all times been the best production or protection which a nation can have against the social diseases that are prevalent today. You just won't tell everybody to do it. The best solution is that everybody does it. You'll be like, oh, let's just make a class of farmers so we can control them. Moreover, he says, that is the only solution which guarantees the daily bread of a nation within the framework of its domestic national economy. With this condition once guaranteed, industry and commerce would retire from the unhealthy position of foremost importance, which they hold today, and would take their due place within the general scheme of national economy, adjusting the balance between demand and supply. Thus, industry and commerce would no longer constitute the basis of the national subsistence, but would be auxiliary institutions. By fulfilling their proper function, which is to adjust the balance between national production and national consumption, they render the national substance more or less independent of foreign countries, and thus assure the freedom of and independence of the nation, especially at critical junctures in its history. See, if you really want to control things, you can ban certain ways that they're used or distributed. So I saw this anti-tobacco commercial, right? And it's like, oh, so you act like you have to undo the propaganda in order to get people to stop smoking, but you don't want to ban cigarettes. Because what would that be a horrible thing to do? Yet they ban cannabis. Do you understand? So I know that in the modern times they're banning it less and less. But think about this. What if the solution was just all commercial sale of cannabis or any of these drug plants or tobacco? What if the commercial distribution and selling was banned, but what was allowed and what was only allowed was private cultivation for yourself? So you can grow your own tobacco, you can grow your own shrooms, you can grow your own poppies, whatever, opium, but you cannot sell it to anybody. And if you're caught giving it to people in order to get influence or status, then that's also illegal. That's how I would take care of it. Anybody can grow tobacco for themselves and dehydrate it and roll it up. They can grow as much cannabis as they want, but it has to be for themselves. If they give it to somebody, nobody better tell the authorities that they're giving it in order for influence. It has to be able to be proven that they're not doing it for influence. They're just giving to their neighbor. You understand? But that takes community police, meaning there's no actual military police system. That there's communities regulating it, and that they choose a chief of their community of high standing. You understand? You don't get like people just moving to your community and becoming a cop. It's like, who the hell are you? It has to come from your own community. Stuff like that. These things can't be solved in Congress, by the way. It can't be solved by any president, no matter what their gender or skin color is. And that includes orange. So, continuing, he says, such a territorial policy, however, cannot find its fulfillment in the Cameroons, but almost exclusively here in Europe. One must calmly and squarely face the truth that it certainly cannot be part of the dispensation of divine providence. Oh, he actually put divine in front of providence for once. But remember, divine is actually the Roman way is that a saint and a god, there's no real distinction. That's why the Catholic Church has you pray to saints, because they're polytheists. But anyway, cannot be a part of the dispensation of divine providence, he says, to give a 50 times larger share of the soil of this world to one nation than to another. In considering this state of affairs today, one must not allow existing political frontiers to distract attention from what ought to exist on principles of strict justice. If this earth has sufficient room for all, then we ought to have that share of the soil which is absolutely necessary for our existence. Okay, I'm going to give you a little pattern to recognize. You have the Vatican. It's its own country. And they use Jesuits and religion to spread their ethnos, to cover for their ethnos. The British do the same with London. They're a small nation compared to how much land they actually own, if you want to say they own it. And then America with Washington, D.C., which actually is its own entity. It's not even a state. So when we say one nation under God, it's actually one ethnos under Gad, which is one ethnos that divides the spoil. Now, the ethnos of the Vatican, the ethnos of the British elite, so-called elite, and the ethnos of the so-called American elite, which is the presidents, are all the same ethnos. And they all divide the spoil, don't they? And their flag is the red, white, and blue of Pharaoh. All their flags. They can hide under communism for a couple decades, but then they go back to the red, white, and blue, don't they? Hope you're understanding. It's a 43-minute mark here. He continues, of course, people will not voluntarily make that accommodation. At this point, the right of self-preservation comes into effect, and when attempts to settle the difficulty in an amicable way are rejected, the clenched hand must take by force that which was refused to the open hand of friendship. I mean, depending on your perspective, is it friendship? I don't know. If in the past our ancestors had based their political decisions on similar pacifist nonsense as our present generation does, we should not possess more than 1/3 of the national territory that we possess today, and probably there would be no German nation to worry about its future in Europe. No, we owe the 2 eastern marks of the empire to the natural determination of our forefathers in their struggle for existence. No, actually, the Most High determines those things. El Elyon. But anyway. He continues, page 125. And thus it is to the same determined policy that we owe the inner strength which is based on the extent of our political and racial territories, and which alone has made it possible for us to exist up to now. And there is still another reason why that solution would have been the correct one. Many contemporary European states are like pyramids standing on their apexes. The European territory which these states possess is ridiculously small when compared to the enormous overhead weight of their colonies, foreign trade, etc. It may be said that they have the apex in Europe and the base of the pyramid all over the world. Quite different from the United States of America. Wow. He just put a veil over his masters. He just covered his master's butt right there. You hear that? Let me read that again. The European territory which these states possess is ridiculously small when compared to the enormous overhead weight of their colonies, foreign trade, etc. It may be said that they have the apex in Europe and the base of the pyramid all over the world, quite different from the United States of America. That's why they had to send you there to take away their capstone so that America could be the new capstone. but they had to get rid of you because you knew too much. And that's why you got the palsy. You're shaking like you got the palsy when you heard the Americans were coming. He continues, the United States of America, which has its base on the American continent, and it is in contact with the rest of the world only through its apex. Sure. Out of that situation arises the incomparable inner strength of the USA, and the contrary situation is responsible for the weakness of most of the colonial European powers. Interesting. This guy's a real good spokesman for the U.S., isn't he? He continues, England cannot be suggested as an argument against this assertion, though in glancing casually over the map of the British Empire, one is inclined easily to overlook the existence of the whole Anglo-Saxon world. England's position cannot be compared with that of any other state in Europe, since it forms a vast community of language and culture together with the USA. So he just demonizes Europe and says Europe is the beast that needs to be slain. And I guess he did his job, right? And he put America right on top. He continues, therefore, the only possibility which Germany had of carrying a sound territorial policy into effect was that of acquiring new territory in Europe itself. Colonies cannot serve this purpose as long as they are not suited for settlement by Europeans on a large scale. In the 19th century, it was no longer possible to acquire such colonies by peaceful means. I mean, is he trying to say the other ones got it by peaceful? Yeah. Therefore, any attempt at such a colonial expansion would have meant an enormous military struggle. Consequently, it would have been more practical to undertake that military struggle for new territory in Europe rather than to wage war for the acquisition of possessions abroad. Thank God, there's only 12 minutes left. It's hot in here. Such a decision naturally demanded that the nation's undivided energies should be devoted to it, a policy of that kind which requires for its fulfillment every ounce of available energy on the part of everybody concerned cannot be carried into effect by half measures or in a hesitating manner. The political leadership of the German Empire should then have been directed exclusively to this goal. No political step should have been taken in response to other considerations than this task and the means of accomplishing it. Germany should have been alive to the fact that such a goal could have been reached only by war. Sure, says Kane. And the prospect of war should have been faced with calm and collected determination. This is page 126. I think I'll try to read these 2 pages before the hour's up. And before my breath is up. Oh, man. The whole system of alliances, he says, should have been envisioned. Babylonian crap. Envisioned and valued from that standpoint. ENVISAGED. I'm going to guess it's not pronounced anyhow it spells. That's called Babylon. Obviously, I can read. These random Babylonian words are just useless. Utterly useless. Drachana Drachwitze, says the Russian. Anyway. Worthless house of worthlessness, these words. From value, from blah, blah, blah. He continues, if new territory were to be acquired in Europe, it must have been mainly at Russia's cost. Ooh, right when I say that. And once again, the new German Empire should have set out in its march along the same road as was formerly trotted by the Teutonic Knights, this time to acquire soil for the German plow by means of the German sword and thus provide the nation with its daily bread. Yeah, the Teutonic Knights are what started the Knights Templar, by the way. I also suspect that their ilk, before they were called the Knights Templar, created Islam, and possibly even before that, their same Soviet spirit created Arabic. But anyway, I digress. For such a policy, he says, however, there was only one possible ally in Europe, that was England. That's why they have the picture of him and the Grand Mufti, or whatever they call it, in Jerusalem. But I don't think he was actually pictured there. They're trying to make him look like he was the abomination that makes desolate. The picture looked very odd. But he did speak to a lot of Middle East Islamic leaders, just like Trump spoke to him. All the Islamic leaders did sword dances with him, gave him a $13 billion contract, and then Route 91 harvest happened in front of a giant black pyramid called the Luxor, and a giant black monolith building where allegedly Saudi royal was sitting, feasting, and watching. But I digress. He continues, only by alliance with England was it possible to safeguard the rear of the new German crusade. Remember, the crusade is the crucifiers. Literally, Catholicism and Islam are the yin and yang of the same coin. They're both used as ethnic cleansing tools to get rid of northern Semites and southern Semites. He continues, the justification for understanding such an expedition was stronger than the justification which our forefathers had for setting out on theirs. Not one of our pacifists refused to eat the bread made from the grain grown in the East, and yet the first plow here was that called the sword. No sacrifice should have been considered too great if it was a necessary means of gaining England's friendship. This guy fawns over England, by the way. Colonial and naval ambitions should have been abandoned, and attempts should not have been made to compete against British industries. Oh, British is literally Bereth Ish. It's the covenant of man in Hebrew. Why is it in Hebrew? So what ethnos is Hitler protecting? What ethnos is he calling superior when he allows... Am I turning black and white? Or am I tripping? Camera looks weird right now. Anyway, what ethnos is he actually protecting? When the war started, he allowed Britain to murder a lot of Germans and cause a lot of destruction, saying, oh, I don't want to fight them. He sent leaflets telling them he was going to bomb them so that they all left. So all their Soviet royalty left. All their Romanov, all the Khazarian royalty left England in time for Hitler to bomb it. Do you understand? What ethnos is he protecting? The same as the Vatican, the same as London, the same as Washington, D.C., the same as every godforsaken president of America. All have the same ethnos, don't they? Even Obama. And even when he was president, guess who was running the show? Hillary Clinton. Blonde hair, blue eye, golden haired. Golden hair, blue eye, white lady. Oh, I'm just a cute little grandma. That's what Hillary Clinton acts like. She's just a cute little grandma. She's just a cute little matriarch, huh? Yeah. Okay. Mr. Hittite continues, spokesman for the U.S. and British war machine, apparently. He says, only a clear and definite policy could lead to such an achievement. Such a policy would have demanded a renunciation of the endeavor to conquer the world's markets, also a renunciation of colonial intentions and naval power. All the means of power at the disposal of the state should have been concentrated in the military forces on land. This policy would have involved a period of temporary self-denial for the sake of the great and powerful future. Like a lockdown. There was a time when England might have entered into negotiations with us on the grounds of that proposal, for England would have well understood that the problems arising from the steady increase in population were forcing Germany to look for a solution either in Europe with the help of England or without England in some other part of the world. Maybe Prescott Bush and Rockefeller. This outlook was probably the chief reason why London tried to draw nearer to Germany about the turn of the century. For the first time in Germany, an attitude was then manifested which afterwards displayed itself in a most tragic way. People then gave expression to an unpleasant feeling that we might thus find ourselves obliged to pull England's chestnuts out of the fire. That's funny. As if an alliance could be based on anything else than mutual give and take, and England would have become a party to such a mutual bargain. British diplomats were still wise enough to know that an equivalent must be forthcoming as a consideration for any services rendered. Let us suppose that in 1904 our German foreign policy was managed astutely enough to enable us to take the part which Japan played. It is not easy to measure the greatness of the results that might have occurred to Germany from such a policy. England swings like a pendulum blue. Bobbies on bicycles 2x2. Westminster Abbey, the Tower, Big Ben, the rosy red cheeks of the little children. Oh boy. We got ourselves a Manchurian candidate, folks. Are you ready? Are you ready? Because it's gonna be a bumpy ride. So, since I didn't get to play this, let me play the orange one. In an introduction for the next president here.
Squeeze, changing orangey orange into vitamin C's. I said,